Hello everyone. Today we will be talking about Benjamin Hawkins. He was a farmer from North Carolina that served as the state's delegate to the Continental Congress. In 1796, George Washington appointed Hawkins to be the General Superintendent of Indian Affairs. This meant that he was responsible for all of the Native American tribes south of the Ohio River. When he was appointed to this position, Hawkins moved down south, settling at a plantation in Georgia with his Creek wife and his 7 children. At this point in time, the United States was establishing itself as the dominant civilization in North America. The goal of westward expansion was on the forefront of our country's mind. The problem? Native Americans occupied these lands. Some believed in forced expansion, which included the possibility of pushing the Native Americans off their land or even the genocide of these native people. Many Americans still viewed the Indians as savage wild beasts. Captivity narratives such as the narrative of the captivity of Miss Mary Rowlandson and the narrative of Lord's wonderful dealings with John Morant, a black, did nothing to dispel this view. On the contrary, captivity stories like these made it easy for Americans to disregard the Indians' livelihood and to nonchalantly advocate forced expansion. Not everyone felt this way, however. Some people, like Benjamin Hawkins and Sansa Malcolm before him, realized the potential for the Indians to be a stable, civilized people given the proper resources and education. As the Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Hawkins served honorably and fairly, putting the interests of the Creek Indians in as high regard as those of the U.S. His ideas and attitude towards these people laid out a foundation for American efforts to integrate the Native American people. His actions also influenced Indian activists like William Appice and Elias Boudinot. We would like to tell you about one affair in particular where Benjamin Hawkins, through his diligent investigations and fair mediation, brought justice to a situation involving the Creek people. Tuskegee Tustunnegau, an Indian chief. Wait, did I say an Indian? I meant a Native American chief. Old habits die hard. Anyway, Tuskegee was a Native American chief that was acting as the Creek commissioner in search of a white man that murdered one of his fellow Indians. Tuskegee was a high-ranking, well-respected warrior, equivalent to the Creek version of the Secretary of Defense. In this situation, however, Tuskegee was accused of attacking a woman while on the search for the murderer. The story we will tell you shows the correspondence between the Americans, the Indians, and right in between them, you guessed it, Benjamin Hawkins. The story begins on February 6, 1798, with a letter from Benjamin Hawkins to Oglethorpe County, Georgia. According to John Hilton, his wife, Elizabeth Hilton, was attacked by a Native American that she was trying to act kindly to. Hawkins is adamant that justice must be served. His investigation showed that Tuskegee was responsible for the said act. The Oglethorpe County Jail was directed to hold Tuskegee until the prosecution, likely extensive, was to begin. At this point, future looked gloomy for the Indian chief. He was to be tried and, given the time period, most likely sentenced to death for hurting a white woman. But on February 12th, a letter was written by the Indian Emautlau Haujo, serving as a plea for the life of Chief Tuskegee. In this letter, he discusses the incident, starting off by saying, quote, "I and the chiefs with me know you and your friends have always been the friends of justice and of the red people, and we know you will do all you can for the best," unquote. He then makes his case, saying, and I paraphrase, "Bickerings and war crimes are committed, unfortunately, and that they are sometimes a result of revenge or a result of past crimes, that while these acts of violence should be avoided at all costs, we Native Americans are not the only people in the wrong. There is a white murderer still on the loose, too. Will this murderer be punished to the same extent as Chief Tuskegee?" He continues by listing the virtues of the Indian chief, saying that he was a friend of the white people, that, quote, "If one of them lost a horse, he was called on to get him. If any of his people violated the rights of the white people, he was called on to see justice done. If they committed murder, he was called on by the nation to revenge the cause of the white people, and he never failed to go," unquote. And that all of this can be vouched for by their beloved friend, Benjamin Hawkins. The only negative quality that Tuskegee had was his fondness of drinking. The man liked his rum, and he was acting out in revenge in his drunken state. Was the Indian chief a bad man, though? No, and his good deeds have been shown to extend to the white men. His tempers were high from seeking revenge. Punishing Tuskegee would only hurt future relations. Please return Chief Tuskegee. As Chief Tuskegee sat in jail, waiting for judgment for his crimes, Oglethorpe County had to make a decision on how to treat the Indian. Their decision would depend heavily on the opinion and judgments of Benjamin Hawkins. The relationship he had with the Creeks, and in particular Chief Tuskegee, could sway the verdict. On March 2nd, roughly 3 weeks after the plea letter was sent, a response was put out. In this letter, Oglethorpe County agreed to release the Indian chief and that they would sink the oblivion all past animosities and will endeavor to brighten the chain of friendship and peace between the two nations, as appears to use by the letter to Colonel Phillips. End quote. While Chief Tuskegee's crimes were very wrong and the decision to release him is controversial, there are several parts of this ordeal that prove just how civilized the Creek people were. First, it should be noted that the white settlers were the first to cause trouble. In fact, Hawkins wrote in a previous letter that there were several white men that were causing trouble in various areas of the South. He reported that several of the chiefs said, and I quote, "It is not for any fear we have that these people can do us any damages that we report them. It is because they are liars and meddlers and rogues. They will meddle in public affairs, are constantly circulating reports injurious to our peace, that they have information that mischief is brewing, the American troops are coming on our land, and such like stories. They disturb the peace of our land by their false and foolish stories, which make our young men uneasy." End quote. This relates much to Appis's An Indian's Looking Glass for the White Man. In this, Appice questions why the Indians are in as bad of a plight as they are. He says it is partially because, quote, "their land is in common stock, and they have nothing to make them enterprising." End quote. Also, the white men around them were treating them wrongly. Appice says, quote, "They would think it no crime to go upon the Indian lands and cut and carry off their most valuable timber or anything else they chose, and I doubt not that they think it clear gain." End quote. If the white men were not meddling in the Indian affairs, doubtless there would be much less trouble between the two groups. Second, it can be seen how desirous many of the Creeks are of peace. Emautlau's letter very eloquently expressed how he hopes that the white men are acting in a way to avoid a war. Although the Creeks are likely much worse off for having the Americans there, many of the Indian chiefs still recognize how detrimental a war could be to them. They are trying as much as possible to comply with the white men's law. Even Chief Tuskegee was noted for being a very adamant supporter of the law.